Good evening, and welcome to the January meeting of the Linnean Society of New York. I'm Doug Futuna. I'm the vice president of the society, and the term is particularly appropriate tonight since vice means in place of. And I'm taking the place of the Linnean Society's president, Debbie Mullins, who I think is enjoying penguin watching in Antarctica at this point. So thanks again very much for joining us. Just a few items before we get to the main feature of the evening, lecture by Professor Joan Strassmann. Last week, and I should say that Debbie provided me with a script, so that if you see me reading the script, that's what I'm doing. So last week you were asked to vote on two issues, to approve the minutes of the December membership meeting and to approve membership applications for new members. And the minutes were approved unanimously by all of those voting, as well as the application by the new members. And so I'm pleased to say that the following people were approved for membership as new members of the Linnean Society. And these are Susan Hallinan as an active member, sponsored by Shannon Kelly. Kate Byrne, also an active member, sponsored by Phil Ribelow. Douglas McPherson, an active member, sponsored by Amanda Bielskas. Kaz Taylor, as an associate member, sponsored by Kristen Ellington. Amy Cook, an active member, sponsored by Tom Stevenson, and Brian Foy, a lifetime member, also sponsored by Tom Stevenson. And so I want to offer all of you a warm welcome to the Society, and we're very happy to have you as members and look forward to getting to know you. If you're not a member of the Linnean Society, I invite you to join. The membership application is on the website, which is Linnean, you have to spell that right, linneannewyork.org/join. That's linneannewyork.org/join. And if you need a sponsor, please feel free to list me, Doug Futuma, or any of our board members as your sponsor. We're fully committed to increasing the diversity of membership, and everyone is welcome to join. For tonight's presentation, we have disabled your microphone and the chat function, and so please use the Q&A feature to submit questions to Dr. Strassmann. Following her presentation, I will be moderating a question and answer session. And so I am really delighted to welcome Joan Strassmann. I've known Joan for quite a long time professionally and have been very familiar with some of her research for a very long time. She is a distinguished evolutionary biologist who has the title of Charles Rebstock Professor of Biology at Washington University in St. Louis. And here her research focuses, as it has throughout her career, on the evolution of social interactions and cooperation, including mutualisms both within species and between species. She received her PhD in zoology at the University of Texas at Austin, and where she studied social cooperation and conflict in paper wasps. And she has studied a number of other organisms as well, but her recent work has been focused for quite a while now and on cooperation in fascinating organisms that are known as cellular slime molds or social amoebae. She has published more than 250 articles on social interactions in these and other organisms, such as stingless bees. And her work has been widely recognized and including by a number of awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship and election to the National Academy of Sciences. More recently, she has turned her attention also to scientific communication, and particularly to stories of birds and the scientists who study them. She recently published a very enjoyable and very informative book called Slow Birding. Um, and also a more recent book that I haven't seen on the social lives of birds. And but this book on slow birding, the art and science of enjoying the birds in your own backyard, will be the subject of her lecture tonight. Joan, welcome to the Linnean Society.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be here. Uh, let's see, I guess I should start with the screen share. Let's see if I can share the correct screen. Is that good? Is that the right screen?
It's still in presentation mode, Joan. If you want to.
Yeah. Why is that? Let's see. Maybe this down here. Still in presentation mode of swap displays. Is that better?
Yep, thanks.
Okay, great. Well, isn't it nice to be on Zoom instead of out there in that cold and nasty weather? Here it was sleeting as I walked home from work. Slow birding may seem like a weird way to approach something that a lot of people like to do really fast and really build up long lists of birds that they've seen. And it's really quite a wonderful thing to just go to sleep at night with hundreds of birds that you've seen in that day running through your mind. But there's another way of birding that I think could also be fun, and it has to do more with just watching the birds that are right around you and seeing what is going on with them so that you may not see a whole lot of birds, but the birds you see, you may be able to get under their feathers and feel just for a moment that you're able to feel the sorts of things that you might imagine that they're feeling. So that's my sort of basic idea, excuse me, of slow birding. I took the title from the slow food movement. This is one of my students watching birds in a class. So the slow food movement started in Italy in the 80s, and it was a response against the McDonald's moving in by the Spanish Steps in Rome and the general homogenization of food when Italy already had such fabulous food. And this food was slow in the sense that it took a while to prepare. It was local. It didn't just get rushed in from somewhere. It's a movement that Carlo Petrini and others had a lot to do with in the city of Bra, and they led demonstrations, not with signs and marches, but with trays of pasta, protesting McDonald's, not by bashing down their doors, but by offering something else that maybe people would find as so much better, so much more local. So I took that appreciation of the local and thought, well, let's just bring that to birds and let's see what we can do with birds in that way. Now, Doug mentioned that my own research has been on on wasps for about half my career, stingless bees a little bit, and then more recently with social amoebas and the bacteria that they have symbiosis with. Now, maybe you guys are different, but most people just don't think of wasps as the organism they might most want to watch. And so my idea was that I would use birds with my students to get across the concepts in the evolutionary biology and behavioral ecology that really were the same for the wasps, for the social amoebas, and also the birds. But the birds might just be a whole lot more fun for the students. I also didn't want to teach in the sense of sharing information with my students. I wanted to teach in the sense of letting them discover their own inner powers of observation. So to do this on the Rice University campus where I taught for many years, I'm now at WashU, but then I was at Rice. I just picked a few really common birds and thought that I would teach a lab course with no lab notebooks, with no methods, results, discussion type thing, but just with a few questions that let the students make their own discoveries. So I first asked them to think about how birds use time and space. Now, to answer that question, they're going to have to watch the birds and just simply see what they're doing and take field notes, not with any goal of a specific paper, but just as a way to explore. So on the Rice University campus, there were nesting 3 species of birds that were really good to use: great-tailed grackles, northern mockingbirds, and yellow-crowned night herons. So these were the birds that I asked them to just watch and write about. And then I also asked how the behaviors differed among the sexes. It was a bit of a trick question because the night herons and mockingbirds don't have very obvious differences between the sexes. So then I could catch the students in a little bit of bias of their own when they decided that the bird bringing the stick to the yellow-crowned night heron must be the male. You know, I'm like, well, why would you think that? Why would the stick bringer be the male? And, you know, we talked about it. Then we finally decided that the only way they could say for sure which sex was which was that if in mating, the one on top was the male. And if they then saw that bird bringing back sticks, they could say males brought back sticks. So that was a lot of fun to get the students to just really watch what was going on. And then the third question I had for them was simply, what else would you like to know? And the semester just went on from there with them exploring their own ideas in curiosity-based study. Well, this class had only a dozen or so students a year. We couldn't really accommodate a whole lot of students. And so then I was thinking that it's really the kind of thing that I would like to share more widely. The idea that you could simply watch what is going on in a way that doesn't necessarily add to your life list or give you hundreds of birds in a day. It's also fun, but it's just something different. So first I developed a slow birding blog, and that was in about 2010, and the students wrote for that, for some of their ideas. But then I'd always wanted to write a book so that these ideas could penetrate more widely. Of course, I know they're already out there and lots of people watch their patches a lot. I wanted people to really look at behavior. What is going on with the birds that are out there? Took me a long time to get up the courage to write a book about birds, frankly. I'm a social insect amoeba person. How dare I write a book about birds? But anyway, I did. I picked a local focus, St. Louis, which is, not necessarily where everyone lives. So I wanted to pick common birds that would be found certainly in the eastern US and as much as possible elsewhere. So 16 of the commonest birds, 5 places, all 20 miles from home. True slow birding. For those of you who haven't been to St. Louis, it's actually really a great city, and it's got the Mississippi River, the Missouri River, the Illinois just a little north, the Merrimack a little south. So it's really got a lot of different different habitats. I also needed to pick birds that the researchers had figured out some pretty cool things about. So I'll start with blue jays. They're a really common bird. I have a special tie to them because back when we lived in Houston, we moved at one point from one house to another, and I opened the car door and a blue jay landed on it and then went in and grabbed a dime out of the console and flew off. It was just amazing. And over the years, we got to know this bird well. The bird came to our hand to take coins. It would sit on my gardening fork waiting for worms. Clearly, it probably was raised as a fledgling by a person and then let go. So this was the first bird I chose. So one thing about blue jays is, I don't know, I guess they're the policemen of the skies. Nobody much likes them. They're not the state bird of any state. Cardinals, western meadowlarks, and northern mockingbirds each have at least 6 states. And your state and my state both have the eastern bluebird. So why? Why haven't we done more with the blue jays? Blue jays, there's a lot of great stories about them. They've been important in studying distastefulness of monarchs. They're thought to be one of the main birds that have brought the oak forests north about after glaciation. They're really quite a fascinating bird. So I guess I'd say next time you're outside, think some kind thoughts about blue jays. See what they're doing. See if you can notice all their different sounds, including the ones where they really sound a lot like hawks. They'll even fool Merlin. See if you can find one for 5 minutes and just follow it and see exactly what it's doing. The book has other activities suggested for every bird. I guess the teacher in me, I couldn't help it. Another is to see if you can pick acorns like a blue jay does, avoiding the ones with weevils and that sort of thing. But they're fun. Okay, here's the next bird I want to talk to you about, the American robin. I did a little thing with Merlin's questions about a bird with both my son and my husband. What color is it? Where did you see it? Etc. To see if what they were thinking of, and they were both thinking of robins. Robins are on the ground. They hop around. They're quite willing to let us get quite close. And so they're just really a great bird. In these very cold days that we have coming, I bet I'll get a robin even at my suet. Of course, they don't usually go to feeders. So there's lots of stories about robins. One of the cool ones is that they have very active, what you might call dating lives. In fact, in a nest, nearly half the young are not sired by the male that tends them, bringing them worms and fruit until they can forage on their own. To figure this out, Patrick Weatherhead and his grad student Karen Rowe used DNA markers just like those we use when we sign up for sites like 23andMe, although we are, of course, not usually trying to figure out our paternity. So another really cool thing that Bob Montgomery and another student, Felina English, discovered is that fathers will take better care of the babies if they came from bluer eggs. Now, this might just seem crazy, but the blue comes from a pigment called biliverdin, which is a signal of female health. So they reasoned that, I mean, birds are not like us where the child that's most suffering gets extra care. Birds are so likely to lose all of their young. They're often more likely to invest as much as possible in the strongest, not the weakest young. So what Bob and Felina did was that they found a whole bunch of robins' nests, highly synchronized, and they took all the eggs away carefully and placed them in an incubator. And just at the moment they took the eggs away, they replaced them in the nest with plaster of Paris eggs, colored either light blue or dark blue. All of the 4 or 5 eggs were the same. And so they took all the real eggs to an incubator, and then they knew when they'd hatch. So then the day before they hatched, they went back and put real eggs back in the nest. And they didn't put necessarily the robin's own eggs back, just a random 4. So it's a really nicely controlled experiment because everyone got either dark or light blue plaster eggs and then got some mix of eggs back. Now, Bob's a great guy. He's sometimes a little bit of a skeptic, and he did not expect to get positive results for this experiment. But in fact, what he found was that for the first 3 days of their life, the 3 crucial days, the fathers from nests that had dark blue eggs fed the babies almost double what they fed the light blue babies. So this is really clear evidence that the males are judging their females' health and caring for the darker blue eggs more. I read a study like that and I just feel like, wow, everybody ought to know about this. It's just so cool. So I'll just tell one more robin story. And this is a person story. I have a friend named Sarah Coker. She's a young biologist who studies bees, and I know her well from my WASP days. She was an undergrad at the University of Illinois and is now on the faculty at Princeton. So whenever I read the papers, I always read the acknowledgments because they often tell the story of who did what and where they were and stuff. And I noticed in one of the robin papers, that Sarah was acknowledged as an undergrad. So I asked her, and I'll just read to you a little bit from the email that she sent me. American robins. Yes, this was my first foray into behavioral ecology. I took a class with Pat Weatherhead and realized how much I adored animal behavior. I signed up for a summer project with one of his grad students, Karen Rowe, and it literally changed my life. It was pretty typical birding field work, waking up at 4 a.m. to go out to our site, search for nests, set up cameras to record behaviors, miss nets to capture birds, ban them and draw blood for paternity analyses, and a field spec to measure the intensity of each bird's plumage color. Once I'd finished that first cup of coffee, I generally loved every minute of it. So the other thing about it that she told me was that the study site was actually a Christmas tree farm. So the nests were nice and low and just Christmas trees. What's not to like? And then one of the people that brought her grad student friend lunch one day was a guy that she hit it off with, and now they're a couple and they have a couple of kids. So the robin work really did change her life, even though she then went on to work on bees. So robins are pretty cool. Here's another really amazing bird of the waterlands. Everywhere you will find coots. So this is an American coot. The Eurasian coots look very similar. What's surprising is not the adult, which I'm sure all of you have seen somewhere or another, but the baby to its left with those really bright feathers. And it's just so surprising that a baby would be so bright. We think of bright colors often as being a sign of sexual selection, that there's a cost to them, and females will preferentially mate with the male with the bright colors. There's a huge amount of literature and all the intricacies of that sort of thing. But these guys, they're little vulnerable morsels of protein, you could say. The last thing they want to do is show off. And in fact, if any sort of rustling or predator sign comes near, the first thing the babies do is bury their heads in the nest or swim into vegetation or hide. They do everything they can to hide those bright colors. So Bruce Lyon wondered why it was that they were so bright. And he thought, well, maybe the parents will care for the bright ones better. Just as an aside on Bruce, he studied these for his PhD up in British Columbia. He's now studying rosy finches on St. Paul Island, which is north of the Aleutians, in a truly remote place. Talked to Bob Montgomery. He was trying to convince Bruce that if he got appendicitis, he would have to operate on him without anesthesia. And Bruce was saying, no, I'm not going to do it. That hasn't proven necessary so far, but the flights in and out of that island are really tough. But so this was Bruce's earlier project. And the first thing he thought was, well, maybe these bright colors give you more parental care. Maybe the parents prefer them. So he tried to paint them and things like that, and it didn't work. So finally, he just trimmed them to see if then the parents would feed them less. And that turned out to be true. So he then realized that there was something to do with parental recognition. Now, before you start thinking that the researchers are killing the birds, I'll just tell you that coots have more babies than they can take care of, and that the parents tend to take the first clutch of it, the first few eggs that hatch, because they don't come out all at once, and they together will care for the first 3 or 4. But then as later babies are coming out, each parent will pick one and care for that one. And sadly, mortality is a fact of life for coot chicks. All right, but still, these are their eggs. Why would they have to recognize their own babies? It still kind of doesn't make sense. Well, so it turns out that in coots, there's tons of something that we call egg dumping. So egg dumping is where a female lays an egg in a nest that's not her own, and so that someone else might take care of those babies. And so usually they do this not at the very beginning. They tend to do it later. It might be coot females that don't have their own nest, but sometimes they do have their own nests. So then there's the problem of how do the coot parents know which young are their own and which are not. So since the first babies to emerge are more likely to be their own, the parents imprint on those first babies and on their particular patterns of bright colors. And so then when the later babies come along, if they don't match, they won't pick them as the special chick that they cared for. So this sounds kind of very yeah, as I tell it. But actually, the way that they figured this out, Bruce has a brilliant grad student named Dai Shizuka, who's at University of Nebraska. And what happened was that there was a coot parent who was killing its own babies, and they knew they were genetically their own, and they wondered why they were doing this. And it then turned out that in that nest, for whatever reason, an egg dumper had managed to get the first babies in. So the coots had imprinted on babies that were not their own. And then when their own babies hatched, they went after them. And it was only through that sort of exception that proves the rule that they were really able to figure out what was going on. Well, I suppose at this point you may be thinking, God, is she going to go through 16 birds? We are going to be here all night long. Lots of cool stories. And so I'll just tell her, I'm not going to go through all the birds. And I hope you get a chance to find my book and read about the other birds, because the things the scientists have figured out are just fantastic. So I'll just take a little slight diversion to talk about my artist. So the book has a drawing, a pen and ink drawing for every bird. And I knew it would have that, and I knew I needed an artist. And the minute people heard I was writing a bird book, they started suggesting their artists and all these kind of people who had done lots of bird books and everything. And that was great, but this was a new chance for me, a new beginning, a new book. I wanted to make this be a new chance for somebody else too. So I wanted to get an artist that had never published a bird book before and that was completely new to it. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, but I did have the goal, and I was going to meet that goal somehow or another. And it turned out that right close to home was Anthony Bartley, who was a biology student in our lab. And I knew that he also was an artist. And he's some of his pictures, his illustrations, paintings. He does lots of different modalities. And, I knew that, but I just thought his art was just so fantastic and so different from something as, not boring, but I don't know, different. I'll just say different from what I knew he loved to do. That I just wasn't gonna almost insult him by asking. By the way, that's his website, fadingroyalty.com, and he has lots of things for sale there. But then he I was his professor, and so he came to me for a recommendation, and he said he was thinking of getting into medical illustration, and particularly was applying for a job at an OB-GYN department. So I thought, oh, well, if that's what you're willing to draw, maybe birds won't be such a far stretch. And so, yeah, he agreed to do it. And we've just had a fabulous time ever since. He's not in St. Louis anymore. He's gone back to Chicago, where he's from. Anyway, so that's my story. And I just knew I could find someone who I could give a chance to. And I'm not going to say that his dream is to become a famous bird artist, but still to give him an opportunity. I could talk about Merlin and eBird at this point. I think any of you that are birders are probably well familiar with these phone apps, but I just love feeling like with Merlin, I learned so much more about what birds I'm listening to and can see, and it's not always right, and I always have to figure that out. And then I also like to feel I'm making a difference for conservation of birds by recording the birds that I see with eBird. So just one other digression before I tell you about amazing snow geese is some people want to know about my writing process and how I do it and how I can fit it in with my, job as a professor and everything. And I know a lot of people are really disciplined and they set aside a certain day or a certain time of day to write. And I could never do that because I had responsibilities to students, I had responsibilities to colleagues. Sometimes those responsibilities took me away for days or weeks from my writing. But if you really want to write and you just have stuff buzzing through your head, then when you do have a moment to sit down and do it, it can happen. So I just feel like you don't have to be the most disciplined writer. You can be the most passionate writer. So that's what's worked for me. So I'll tell you about a couple more birds. Snow geese is one of my very favorite birds. Here's a pair of snow geese. Unlike the robins that are such philanderers, they pair up, but they don't stay faithful to each other. The snow geese do. They pair for life. They spend a lot of time picking their mates. They migrate together. They nest together in the far northern Arctic, with the male following the female to her home nesting grounds. So they're matrilocal in that way. So watching them and these behaviors, you could almost say, well, they're really a better version of ourselves. And maybe they are a version of ourselves, but not necessarily just a better one. It turns out there's too many snow geese. They degrade their habitat beyond use, place that Fred Cook most studied them in La Perouse Bay, which is rather farther south than where they normally breed, but still in the Hudson Bay, so still very far north. They don't breed there anymore. They've ruined the habitat for themselves and also for all of the other shorebirds that formerly bred there. Their feed, they've yanked up so much of the vegetation. Their feet have churned it into mud. And it's not just this place, but it's anywhere snow geese nests really don't last for that long. Another thing about snow geese is that they're sick. There's a kind of avian cholera that kills as many as 30% of them a year. Now, it's called an avian cholera. I don't exactly know why. It's not related to our cholera virus. It doesn't have the same symptoms as our cholera virus. It is a virus. Anyway, so they're sick. They ruin their habitat not only in the far Arctic, also in the rice fields, where there's many of them in Texas and Louisiana, are the ones I'm most familiar with. And yet still they multiply. Still they increase in numbers. In fact, they increase so much that there's a springtime hunting season for them. And lead shot is forbidden, but otherwise you can kill them as they're flying north. And I first learned about this on Facebook when one of my scientist friends was cooking up some snow geese, was making, what was he making? Yeah, little skewers of snow geese. I was just kind of horrified because I hadn't heard that you could hunt anything in the spring, but it's open season on them because there's so many, and yet still they keep going. So these are snow geese. There's a blue form of them, which is also a snow goose, but it's called a blue snow goose. And it used to nest. Well, they didn't know where it nested, but it used to winter in Louisiana, whereas the snow geese, the white form, wintered in Texas. But as the rice fields expanded, then the two forms of geese started to mix and even interbreed. But they still didn't know where the blue geese came from. So there was a Canadian named Dewey Soper, whose dream it was to figure out where these snow geese nested. And so this is just a little reading from the book. We all take on our own challenges for reasons known or unknown, even to ourselves. And these challenges enrich our lives. For a famous ornithologist, J. Dewey Soper, the personal challenge was to find the breeding grounds of the blue goose. Like many discoveries by Europeans and their descendants, discovering meant connecting with the right native people who knew all along where something was. And so it was with Soper. An Inuit named Salia drew a map from memory that pointed to Bowman Bay on Baffin Island. By mid-May, Soper, 5 Inuit, and 42 dogs pulling sledges crossed to Bowman Bay. On June 2nd, one flock of blue geese flew over, and by June 6th, thousands had appeared. He had discovered, i.e., talked to the right people who knew where they were, where the blue geese were nesting. So the blue form of the snow geese. So you may wonder if since they fly back to where the females are, they'll on the wintering grounds for the blue and the white to mix, they would have to find each other and then go either to the blue geese or snow goose breeding grounds according to which the female was. So Fred Cook, who had did a lot of the studies on snow geese, has written a really great book on them. He wondered how if they paid attention to the color. And so he did a little experiment at the breeding grounds with young snow geese. And what he did was he took some families, parents and their large chicks, their half-grown young, and dyed their feathers pink. And then others he left alone. And then he put them in arenas, and the way he did it was he dyed some of the birds themselves were pink, some weren't, and then their families were or were not. And so what he found was that the snow geese preferred to socialize with birds that were the same color as their families. Now, this is just done in arenas. It's nothing as elaborate as actually figuring out who they would ultimately mate with. But he was able to show that they did notice the pink color, and that it wasn't like they could look in the mirror and decide, oh, I'm pink, I need another pink one. It was more, my family's pink, I will hang out with the pink ones. So there was a color pattern there, but it's not been enough for the snow geese to separate. So another thing about that color pattern is that the gene that's involved, I don't know if I wrote down what that gene is. The gene that's involved in the different color pattern is the same one that influences red hair, and it's a mutation in a different place, but I thought it was kind of cool that it's the same gene. Tell you about another bird. You ready for another bird? We doing okay on time? Okay, I'll tell you about the white-throated sparrow. This is one of my very favorite birds. So this is white-throated sparrow. This was drawn and colored by Anthony Bartley, and you can see that the above the eye and down the middle of the head is white. And there's another also under the chin is white, but these two places, there's another form of this bird that is tan there. So there's actually two forms, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So I'll tell you one story first before I get into that detail. And that is, do you know their song? I'm sure you all know their song. I like to think of it as pure, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada. I know some people say old Sam Peabody, 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 but I like the Canada version better. Well, it turns out that in British Columbia, I think it was British Columbia, a group of white-throated sparrows started changing their song and singing it differently. And instead of pure, sweet Canada, 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 they sang pure, sweet Canna, 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 dropping off that last syllable. And so, that was interesting. But then the very next year, they found birds that were singing that shorter syncopated song in the east at field station in the Adirondacks, where they studied these birds for a long time. And so what they think is that both birds flew to the same wintering grounds, heard the new song, liked it, and then brought it back to their home. So when you're outside this spring, actually winter, they don't breed as far south as where you or I are, but I hear the birds here in St. Louis trying out their song here in the winter. So that's the first story about these birds. The second story, I was getting ahead of myself and starting on, is more complicated, and it's about their chromosomes. And I decided not to give you a picture of chromosomes. You know what chromosomes look like. And in birds, there's sex chromosomes that are XO, which means females, and humans XY is males. In birds, the one with two different ones are females. And the chromosomes demarcate two sexes. So, and I'm talking about meiosis and chromosomal sex. I'm not talking about any of the other fascinating complexities. But it turns out that in white-throated sparrows, we can reliably say that they really have four sexes. Now, there's lots of reasons that shouldn't be stable, but let me tell you why. It's because there's another pair of chromosomes, long ones, that have this huge inversion in one of the two of the pair. And an inversion is just, if you cut out a piece of the chromosome and flipped it and stuck it back in upside down, that's an inversion. And then it won't match the other one and do all the recombination and stuff that good chromosomes are supposed to do. And so it's the white ones that have this white lore here and the white band on the head. It's the white ones that have that flipped chromosome. And a white mated to a white male mated to a white female cannot produce fertile offspring. Those babies die. Now, tan may be more natural. Tans actually can mate with tan or with white and produce fertile offspring, but the tan males tend to always prefer white females. So you might wonder, well, why is that? And it turns out that there's a gene in that inverted area that influence, it's probably a bunch of genes, a big gene complex that influences the behaviors. So the white males, they're aggressive, they're territorial, they're bad fathers, don't care for their young very much, and they philander, finding other mates as much as possible. The tan males, by contrast, are not as aggressive. They tend to have smaller territories where they're faithful and care for their young assiduously. So if a tan male mated with a tan female, which he's perfectly capable of doing, he would run the risk of that female philandering with a white-throated male. But if the tan male mates with a white female, those are not available to the white males because their babies would be sterile. So they're essentially four sexes. By the way, this is one of the birds that Audubon got wrong. He painted the white and the tan, but he thought the tan was the female and the white was the male. So he's wrong. So this story took quite a long time to figure out. And you can look under your feeders and see if you don't find both tan and white birds. They're less obvious in the winter when they're not breeding, but you can still probably see some differences. So how are we doing? Wrap it up. I think I'm getting close to the end. I can tell you a couple of things. First of all, my next book is not yet written, and it'll come out in the spring of 2025. And it'll be about social lives of birds. And I just finished writing the seabird chapter, which was really a lot of fun. This fall, I'll have a book, which is sort of a journal book from slow birding, which has blank pages and places to write your own observations and draw. I just guess I'd like to end on one last note, and that is hope. And maybe you all are better at it than I am. It's sometimes challenging, and we have a very small Audubon Society in Farmington, Missouri, deep in the Ozarks, and they put out a nice little newsletter. And the last issue just said, had a little piece saying, is there hope in this time of climate change? And that it's important. It's also a topic at the American Ornithological Society meeting that I went to, in particular in Puerto Rico, where conservation was a big topic, that we have to be careful to not so discourage young people that they don't keep fighting for change. So here's just a couple things that are doing better. California's removed at least 4 dams, opening habitat for salmon. And it's ultimately going to be one of the largest dam removal projects in the world. Electric vehicles are growing apace in this country. I wish we could go back and be a country of trains, but that's harder. Tigers, elephants, and leopards in Asia are defying 12,000 years of extinction trends by thriving alongside humans. I'm on a review committee for NCBS in Bengaluru, and one of the tiger researchers there is part of the group that I learned from, and that was also encouraging. And finally, the piping plovers are again nesting on Chicago's Montrose Beach for the first time in 70 years. and one returned there to fledge Ohio's first, returned different place to fledge Ohio's first piping plover in 80 years. So I spend my summers in northern Michigan and an area of a big piping plover conservation. So it's just good to remember that sometimes things do a little bit better. So thank you. Shall I stop the share?
I'm trying to, this is Doug. I'm trying to figure out how to make myself visible, but don't know how we do that. But there, there I am. And Joan, thank you very, very much for that presentation. I have a few questions of my own, but I see that there are at least two questions. And so as I said at the start, if you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, you can type a question, and my role is to read off those questions. And there's also a raise hand that if you wanted to use that, but I think the Q&A feature is what we should start with. And so the first of these, Frank asks, do Canada geese suffer from the same form of cholera as snow geese?
And I'm afraid my answer is that I don't know.
Right. Um, so, I mean, it's the sort of thing, unless people notice that there's sort of a die-off of some kind happening, it might be that, that there is a virus present, but if there's no obvious cause for alarm, it wouldn't be investigated. So, um, Richard asks, how are state birds chosen? Is there a political process? That's a different kind of question. Um, do you
But my
do
answer will be the same.
you,
Sorry, really don't know.
yeah, no,
Probably different for each state, but yeah.
I know that this is a different country. Costa Rica apparently held a plebiscite to ask people what their national bird should be. And this is in the just a couple of decades ago, I believe. And the and do you yeah and do you know, Joan, what the national bird of Costa Rica is as a result? It's a bird that just occasionally inches its way into the southernmost U.S. along the Mexican border.
A
And
quetzal?
the answer is the clay-colored robin. It's a quite a drab. It looks just like a robin,
Yeah.
except it's kind of a
Yeah.
drab brown.
Yeah.
But it's the bird that every Costa Rican knows because, like our robin, it's ubiquitous. It's in, if there's a tree anywhere near you, it's likely to have a clay-colored robin in it. So that's the answer for Costa Rica. I don't know what the answer would be for any of the states. And in any case, I think probably most of those state birds were chosen quite a long time ago, weren't they? Um,
Yeah.
um, um, Clint asks, do snow geese proliferate so much because there are no natural predators?
I think they're proliferating because of the rice fields on the feeding grounds in their wintering times. So I think it's the southern end, the winter's end of their behavior. They have lots of predators up in the Arctic, foxes and gulls and yeah, there's lots of
Jaegers, things like that.
Jaegers. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. No, there's lots of predators on the nests, but it's the rice that's just yeah.
Yeah, because of course at one time they weren't as phenomenally abundant as they are now, and I think you're right. It's just that humans have created this incredibly rich resource for them. Um, Julia asks, is it common for late yellow-crowned night herons to nest in urban trees? We have yellow-crowned night herons out here in Long Island, but we don't think of them as a city bird.
Well, they nest in Houston. They nest in the live oaks. They have sort of a loose colony right at the entrance of Rice, and then there were other colonies in the area that I was aware of. So um, I don't know if it's generally common, but at least in Houston, in the live oaks, it seemed pretty common.
Mhm. Um, and Lucy asks, what was one thing you learned about birds while writing this book that surprised you?
Oh, there were so many things that surprised me. I guess the thing that I most came away with was how generous people were with their time and with their stories and with their willingness to read my chapters and just tell me stuff. I just felt like I was this, outsider in the bird community, and there just could not have been nicer. And maybe it shouldn't have surprised me, but it made me feel wonderful.
Okay. But there was, yeah, but you off the top of your head, you don't have a feature of a bird that you said, wow, that is amazing. I never thought of that.
Well, I'll tell you one from my new book that's truly amazing, and that's how field fares defend themselves. So when a predator attacks a fare nest, the
Let's just
field
back up. Field fare is a European bird in the robin genus, so they're related to
yes,
robins.
yes,
Yeah. So
exactly.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Just want to
sorry.
be sure that everyone had.
Anyway, these birds come from behind and they poop on them. They shoot their poop in the air on the attacking bird, gluing its feathers together. I mean, doesn't everybody need to know that?
I can confess I didn't know that, and I will do my best. I'll figure out some way of using that information in the future. Someone would like to say, do you have any hints on how to carve out time for slow birding? It's enjoyable, but sometimes rushing around gets in the way. How do you have to discipline yourself?
Well, I got this book contract in April of 2020, if that gives you a clue. So it was the pandemic. We were fortunate. We had a friend from Paris who was a visiting professor. So we had a little bubble of three. So I guess I just think we should all figure out how to preserve some of that extra time that we had when we weren't rushing around, when we weren't able to be rushing around. I've got three kids and they're grown, so I highly recommend letting the kids grow up. It gives you a whole lot of time. um,
Or better yet, get your kids to go birding with you when they're about 9 or 10 years old.
ours bird a lot. My youngest did a science fair project on coots. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if I had the secret to how to figure out time, yeah.
So, I'm not sure how we're doing. Yeah, we have at the time for a couple more questions. It's just a couple of minutes after 8 o'clock. Um, and but so I have a question that that occurred to me when you were talking about snow geese and how they're monogamous, which I think is true of many of the geese, that they really do form long-term pair bonds,
Right.
and between a male and a female year after year. And you contrast that with ducks, many of which I think are highly polygamous, no pair bond at all. I mean, they're kind of famous for that. And what is your sense of why it would be advantageous, on the one hand to be monogamous, or on the other hand to be polygamous? You have it?
You know, yeah, these are all really hard questions. The only thing I can say is my head is in this new book. So it seems like long-lived birds are more likely to be monogamous. So many of the seabirds that live for a very long time are monogamous. and faithful. Maybe the ducks live shorter lives. They're in more vulnerable places. I think the birds that fly up to the high Arctic, which is just so productive in the summer, may live longer. But there's life takes so many different forms. Thought you were going to tell about the mallards and their corkscrew penis, and then the female's genital tract is also a corkscrew, but turns in the opposite direction with lots of dead ends.
So
So
they make it as hard for the male as possible to actually inseminate them. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
Rick Prum's favorite topic in his book about the evolution of beauty. It doesn't sound like that fits into the evolution of beauty, but he does make that connection. Um, Someone asks, again, this is more about you than about birds. How has slow birding impacted the way you perceive birds in general? How has it impacted your mental health, if at all?
Well, slow birding is just something I've loved to do for a long time, and I told you I taught this course for many years at Rice. We then also started to teach a field bird biology course. It was basically an excuse to get out and do a lot faster birding with Cinti Lee, who's a world famous geologist, but also a fabulous birder. So for me, the birding came when we stopped working on wasps in the field. So I always had to get out in the field. This social amoebas, the slime molds, just they require some field work, but not that much. So for me, it was always about having to get outside, having to see, to be in nature, not just to take a brisk hike. I love to do that too, but to watch things. And birds are good. I can remember, being in a meadow in Italy, lying with a camera on a wasp nest, and I was just lying inches from the nest and watching the wasps and watching what they were doing and everything. And to me, that was just as rewarding as watching birds. Birds are here because they want to be. Mammals tend to be nocturnal. Uh, Insects are great, as I just said. But it's winter now and they're not here. So yeah, for me, it's just not an option to not get outside. But as far as my mental health went, I wanted to write this book for about 10 years and kept not writing it and feeling kind of like a failure. And that was really terrible for my mental health. So actually, Franz de Waal introduced me to his agent 10 years before I finally figured out how to got over self-doubt enough to write a book. So doing something that I had long wanted to do and thought maybe I would never do, actually doing it was just fantastic for my mental health.
That sounds like a lesson for us all. And it sounds like a very uplifting note on which to end this meeting. Joan, thank you very much. Thanks very much to all the members, and if there are any non-members of the Linnean who have tuned in, very glad that you've been here, and we really appreciate it, Joan, very much. Thanks so much. Bye now.
Bye bye.